business school type stuff, and that's fine. And do marketing, and I can find tenants, and I can meet people and talk to people. I'm good with people, but you know, there's a lot of intricacies of this that I don't know. So he's going to be my partner in this. Well, Al gets on the plane. I'm getting there shortly thereafter, and we've obviously got November 1st rents. Now, our handyman is collecting our November 1 rents that are not coming from the government by check. 2/3 of them come via check, and we've got a rent roll of, I don't remember, somewhere north of like 12 grand in rents coming in. About 4 grand of that is cash. Our handyman apparently collects 4 grand in cash and then decides after 13 years of working for my partner that crack is a better idea than working for my partner. And he literally goes off the deep end. Like, we lose him to drugs. He lives in my partner's building. He works for my partner. He drives my partner's truck. He uses my partner's cell phone, and he is employed using my partner's tools. Instead, he decides that none of that matters, and he'd rather do drugs. So that was my introduction to the business, was that I literally lost the guy who was supposed to help me do this. The very first month's rent, because remember, we bought all this property, and it was financed 100%. Like, it was like, here's my 10 grand for legal fees, but there's no money in the company. The company is like based on like, we need the rent that comes in every month to pay the bills. So the first month, we're missing 1/3 of the money to pay the bills. We no longer have the guy who can fix the toilets, and I'm on my own. And that was trial by fire. That was being thrown in at the deep end. So I had to go out there, and I had to actually find other property managers, people who had actually experience in doing this. But luckily, networking, I'm telling the world about my problems, and a friend of mine who plays keyboards goes, oh, I know somebody, and so-and-so, there's a husband and wife, and they do this sort of thing, and they've turned around a bunch of downtown buildings, and they're really good. So I ended up like getting them to work with me, and you know, we kind of held things together while I was out of the country. And then, you know, he got back and, you know, was able to like then mentor me through the rest of it. Talking about the States, I've got one of my friends from business school and one of the guys from EWI, Robert Allen. So I'm sure that everyone takes courses, but there are people that you just click with. And Kyle was one of those guys. Kyle lives in Minneapolis. That's sort of why I, you know, do my U.S. real estate investing there. And then I've got other, you know, other people, friends of mine that are all, you know, invested with me, joint venture partners, and then, you know, lots of trusted, you know, members of the power team. So, talking about these places, you want to see how bad it can get. Well, this is Pritchard. That's 4 units. You know, those don't actually have windows there in the porch, and you know, see the plywood on the door there. This is Austin. This is a 7-unit rooming house. You know, backyard's all, you know, cut up, and there's a pit bull that lives back there. And I for real, you know. This is 186 Austin. That's a 9-unit house, 1 bathroom. You can legally have in Winnipeg up to 10 people living in a property with 1 bathroom. There was theoretically a shower in the basement, but it was like more like a pipe coming out of a wall and a sewer hole. And the toilet, I wouldn't wish on anybody. So, I mean, there was 1 good washroom, and then there was the basement. And in the end, we ended up like boarding up the basement door and all that kind of disaster. And then this is Fountain. Fountain to this day, like I was in Fountain just the other day. But Fountain, I'll tell you, it's again right down in the core of Winnipeg. My very first trip when Al and I were looking at potentially buying the place, Saturday afternoon, bright sunny. It's actually a day much like in the picture there, and I was scared to go in the place. I'm scared to go in this place on a Saturday afternoon with my 6'3" partner, right? And we had to cross a police line. In that unit right there, it was also that unit right there, someone had a guest in from out of town, and they had had a drug party, and someone had overdosed and died. So we had to cross a police line as we were checking out the property before we bought it. Within 2 months, I'm in that place, 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night, thousands of dollars of cash on me, and I'm by myself. Because it just, all that matters is like knowing the place. Now I know what the neighborhood is. I know everybody that lives there. I've gotten to know them. They're, for the most part, harmless people. They're good people, but things change. Things change very quickly. It took 60 days for my, fear to go away. So, after all that disaster, of course, with all those rooming houses, I start looking for what to do next. Al's out of the country, so we're not really doing anything else. I'm handling that on a daily basis in Winnipeg, but where do I really want to be investing? Well, the whole reason why I took those EWI Robert Allen courses was just that. I was looking at the U.S. The post-meltdown pricing was nationwide. So when people say, well, why do you want to be in the U.S.? When the U.S. system collapsed, everything went down everywhere, regardless of whether it made sense or not. Prices went down, they went down everywhere. They went down more in some places and less in other places, but they went down everywhere, and it often did not relate to a lot of the other fundamentals. And some of the markets still had strong fundamentals. Places that were close to where I lived, places that I went to concerts and football games and hockey games. Minneapolis in my case, because it was just south of Winnipeg. There were places that are close to you, places like Rochester, New York. Again, it was, and I have friends who are invested from Toronto who are invested in Rochester. You get the car and drive to Rochester. Take you 3 hours, but you're there. You don't have to get on a plane, and it's got strong fundamentals. The employment situation is high. You don't have high rates of unemployment. You have high rates of employment. The economy is diverse. There isn't one employer in a place like Detroit or where you're reliant on one sector to be strong. The rents are very high in certain places. Minneapolis had very high rents. The rents did not go down. The rents in 2006, 2007 were the same. In fact, they probably went up slightly after the meltdown. Odd as that may seem, the rents would actually go up because as people were being displaced from their homes, out of home ownership, they're actually strengthening the rental market. So as a landlord, if I'm looking to buy and hold property, I'm actually finding that the rents have actually gone up. Bonus for me, the purchase prices have fallen and the rents have gone up. That's a perfect situation for getting into investing in long-term hold properties. And of course the vacancy rates, as more people move out of ownership, they're going to drive those vacancy rates down. So that's why I looked at the US and said, yeah, this just makes sense. Now, where was I going to go? I already mentioned, that there's places like Minneapolis that were good. I did take a trip to Vegas. I went down there with actually a few years before we actually did all of this stuff with Al. He and I and another partner of his, we'd actually gone to Vegas and Phoenix to look at stuff. Al's other partner bought a place, and the view is pretty much this view. He bought a place on the Strip, but he bought it for the right reasons. He was already a multi-millionaire, did a lot of businesses. He bought a cheap condo on the Strip on Vegas for himself. He wasn't buying it for a rental or an investment, he just bought it for him. But I didn't want to go to Vegas, and I'll tell you that Vegas is, essentially it's tourism, it's gambling, and I've been to Vegas a lot of times when I was in the corporate world for trade shows. But I think that all three of those elements, they're just three legs of the same stool. It's all related to, sort of people going to Vegas and spending money. So their economy is based on, people going to Vegas. And I think that Vegas is a lagging city in terms of an economic indicator. You're talking about lagging indicators. So when New York is more successful and there are companies with head offices in New York, they'll eventually spend more money to go to put trade shows on in Las Vegas. When the people who live in New York are doing better in their jobs and are making higher wages, they'll go to Vegas more to gamble. And when families in New York are doing better, they will then take their families on vacation to Las Vegas. But New York has to be doing better first for Las Vegas to do better. So I think that Las Vegas is always going to be one of the last cities to recover. And because it's so predominantly focused in that one sector, I just didn't see Vegas as being a good place to be, despite the purchase prices being low They had also built out a lot, so there was a lot of vacancy, and there just wasn't that diversity. Now the same thing, when we took our first Rich Dad course in Hamilton with Mark Rousseau, Mark had just come back from Detroit where he had literally bought city blocks with his credit card. And that's great, but Detroit right now is a city where the infrastructure, the physical structure of Detroit was built to house 2 million people. And right now, the population of Detroit has fallen below that of Winnipeg. Winnipeg is, you know, probably in around 750,000. So the property may be very, very, very well priced in Detroit, but the trouble is that you're going to look at, you know, you're always going to have a really, really, really bad vacancy rate, right? Because, you know, when there's 2 houses for every person, they can always go and find a better rental property than your rental property. So you're never going to be able to get a substantive rental rate. And as a buy and hold investor, that just means Detroit. I don't care if Detroit is, the houses are priced at $10 each. I don't want them. You know, that's just me. So I looked at Minneapolis and I said, this is the right